since the release of Liu Che, Alexander the Great's return to his former glory has been legendary. I don't think we've seen any commander quite like Alexander the Great make such a crazy comeback to the meta in Rise of Kingdoms, but today I'm here to share with you guys that I think the cracks in his armor are starting to show just a little bit, but I don't want you to panic. He is still my best performing March in this current KVK, but we do need to talk about the future of Alexander the Great, and with so many new players joining the game right now, this is a great time for me to refresh my guide here for Alexander the Great in 2025. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, if you guys appreciate guides that help you get value out of your older commanders here in Rise of Kingdoms, please consider dropping a thumbs up on the video. It really helps out the channel a ton. With that being said, some of you who might be new players are asking, Omniarch, how do you even get Alexander the Great? I just started playing. I don't even see him in the commander menu here. Who is this? When does he come around? What's the deal? Alexander the Great is a season 2 legendary commander who shows up on the Wheel of Fortune, and then later down the line he will show up in the legendary chests, which can be found in the tavern over here, and eventually he does show up in the daily special offer bundles where you can purchase sculptures of him every single day. Now, as you probably already noticed, he is an infantry versatility and attack tree commander, and when he first came out in Rise of Kingdoms, he was easily one of the best, if not the single best legendary commander in Rise of Kingdoms. And then after a little while, his reign sort of fell off. He became a little bit squishy, he had no AoE, and he didn't really fit into the meta until he got a really solid museum relic and a partner in crime in the form of Liu Che. But why is he so good with Liu Che, and why has his resurgence been so dominant here in Rise of Kingdoms, and will that continue in 2025 and beyond? Because you don't want to invest in Alex if his reign is almost over. So let's quickly go over what Alex is doing on the battlefield. His active skill, when not expertised, is called Shield of the King, and it says this commander's troop gains a damage absorbing shield for 4 seconds with a damage factor of 1200. Now, this is very important because we don't see that many shields on open field meta commanders these days. Some of them have it on, like, you know, William Wallace's expertise. It's kind of just like this little side thing that he does. But the way that shielding factor works is that the damage factor is scaling with the number of troops that are in your army, just like damage factor scales with any other commander that deals damage. Okay, so shielding factor is similar to damage factor in that way, but I will say that just like a 1200 damage factor active skill has gotten power crept to oblivion, a 1200 damage factor shield has also been power crept to oblivion, so much so that the developers have even created a new mechanic called mighty shielding, which is just a stronger form of the shield. So that's the first part of the active skill, a 4-second shield. But because it's so weak and it's not a mighty shield, this shield is not going to last you for 4 seconds. It will probably last you, I mean, depending on if you're getting hit by AoE or something, it'll last like 2 turns. Okay, so really you're not getting 4 seconds of shielding factor here. But also you grant a additional shield to a nearby ally or friendly troop with the lowest percentage of units remaining, including this commander's troop, for 2 seconds with a damage factor of 600. And once again, with this small damage factor shield going to the weakest of troops nearby, this is going to last maybe 1 turn, if that. It might just reduce the damage you take for a turn. So okay, a little bit of supportive nature here, but shielding is not that exciting in 2025. Let's take a look at the second skill. It says if this commander's troop is on the map, you are immune to all damage reducing debuffs. That's actually insane. We've never seen an immunity like this before or since. What this means is that if you're hit by the active skill of Zhuge Liang and it says troops hit by the skill deal 15% less damage, that you're immune to that, which is great because you see Zhuge Liang all the time. Also, the 4th skill of Liu Che, whenever Liu Che does smite damage, so with his AoE active skill, the target deals 10% less damage for 3 seconds. Well, great news, Alexander the Great is immune to that as well. Okay, all damage dealt reductions are very, very debilitating, so to be immune to all of that is amazing. And since you're pairing him with Liu Che, you're never going to lose that super powerful 5 target AoE on the active skill. Okay, so we love to see that immunity right there, but this isn't where the second skill ends. It says whenever their troop launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to deal extra direct damage with a damage factor of 1700 to the target and reduce the target's healing received by 30% for 5 seconds with a 3-second cooldown. Okay, so this is also why Alexander the Great, or at least one of the main reasons why he's so good with Liu Che, because if we look at Liu Che's expertise here, it says launch an extra combo attack, and it says combo attacks can trigger any effects triggered by basic attacks. So not only are you able to trigger this 1700 damage factor off of your regular basic attacks, effectively 1 in 4 basic attacks is going to be a double basic attack, which means you'll have another chance at popping this 1700 damage factor. Okay, so by pairing Alexander the Great with Liu Che, you're going to get this 1700 damage factor more frequently than you would by pairing him with any other commander in the game. Or I guess I should say you could still pair him with other combo commanders, but right now that only leaves you with Arthur and Subutai, and there's obviously no synergy there unless you're in a certain KVK. We're not going to worry about that. So okay, so the poking damage here is it's 1700, and honestly for poke damage that's really high. A lot of other poking commanders have like 1000 damage factor, maybe a 500 damage factor tick over 3 seconds or something. So this is a really powerful instant proc damage, which we really like to see. It's not as strong as like active skill damage factor, but the fact that you get it for free without any rage requirement is insane, right? Because if you think about the current meta with rage reduction on William Wallace or anybody with the smite tree, there's also rage reduction on Philip's 4th skill here. There's still some silencing from Guan Yu going around and other silences from other sources. There's all these different ways where your rage regeneration can be nerfed or stopped altogether by the enemy, and yet you still will be able to pop this no matter what, which is very powerful. Let's take a look at the 3rd skill. It says this commander's infantry units gain 30% march speed. Okay, so right off the bat, this is the single fastest infantry commander in the entire game. Anyone that comes close is max 20% march speed. Okay, we see 20% on commanders like Liu Che, like Charles Martel when he's expertise, but we never see 30%. That's actually insane. That's also one of the things that sets him apart from Philip, who only has again 20% march speed. So okay, fastest infantry commander in the game right here. Also 30% attack while on the map. Okay, so it's no tanky stats, right? It's not the craziest stat in the world, infantry attack, but it's a decent amount of it. Let's take a look at the 4th skill. It says if you don't have a shield, you'll gain 40% attack. Okay, well that's pretty good because we already talked about how your shielding factor is pretty weak, right? And so you're actually not going to have a shield very often. So most of the time you're going to get 40% attack, which means most of the time you will have 70% infantry attack. Okay, that's insane. But on the turns that you do have a shield, whether it's from your Alex, whether it's from a nearby expertise William Wallace, whether it's from a nearby CPO Prime who just gives 500 damage factor shields to allies, you're going to get 30% defense, which is quite good. And then finally the expertise says basically all of the same things at the top here, but now you're going to be also debuffing up to 3 nearby enemy troops for 4 seconds, and you're going to make them take 30% more damage. Okay, so that is a crazy debuff. 3 nearby enemies take 30% more all damage for 4 seconds. That is a super long debuff. Okay, 4 seconds in Rise of Kingdoms is quite a long time, especially because you're going to be popping this active skill probably once every 8 seconds. So that means you'll have 4 seconds of this debuff active, 4 seconds of it not active, and then you're going to reapply it again. So like 50% of the time your enemies are going to take 30% more all damage. That's like kind of insane. And even if that's being generous, even if it's 35% of the time, that's still insane. Okay, all that 30% more all damage taken is wild, because by it being a debuff on the target, that means everyone hitting that target gains the benefit of that debuff, which is crazy. So okay, now that we've reviewed the skills for Alexander the Great, and we know that the active skill without the expertise is mid, but with the expertise it's crazy good. He's actually very supportive, gives you a ton of stats, gives infantry the march speed that they need, and he has an instant proc hit that doesn't care about rage debuffing. And in a current meta where poking is king, this pops off. Okay, with the skill review out of the way, let's go over 3 different talent builds that you can use with Alexander the Great. Now I will warn you that the only time that you really should be using Alexander the Great as a primary commander would be in KVK 2 and maybe KVK 3, but after that you really don't want to use Alexander the Great as a primary commander. Not because he's bad as a primary commander, so to speak. I mean, he's not great as primary, to be honest. I don't love the attack tree very much, but it's mainly for player psychology, right? A lot of times players, especially older players like myself, if you see someone using an Alex primary in Season of Conquest, then my assumption, and the assumption of many other players, is that you probably don't have better commanders to use as primary, and so you might not be a very strong player, and you will be targeted in the open field like crazy. So just keep that in mind. But for those of you that are in KVK2, or you find yourself in a situation where you're going to use Alexander the Great as primary, then let me show you guys a few talent builds. Okay, the first one I'm going to share with you guys right here is is if you're going to be pairing him in season 2 of KVK with YSG as the secondary commander, so Alex YSG, then I would go with something like this, where you come up here, you grab the 6% march speed from the attack tree, you get fight to the death with 3 points, 3 points into armored joints, and you grab burning blood along the way, which is nice. Then you grab all of the points in the infantry tree except for the 1 point in defense over here. If you want to grab this, you can get rid of this 1 point in march speed, but especially in KVK2, I'd rather have that 3% march speed than the 1% defense. That's just me. You can change your mind if you want to, but this gives you as many infantry stats pretty much as possible besides this, and you still get the 6% health and all the march speed over here, plus the extra 1% health as well. The reason this is good for YSG is because you're avoiding the martial mastery here, which reduces the skill damage that YSG deals, and you're still getting all the march speed and stats that you want. If you're going to be using him as a primary commander with a secondary who does not deal skill damage, so for example like a Charles Martel maybe, or someone who only deals a small amount of skill damage, then you could do something like this, where you literally just put every single point in the infantry tree, and then in the attack tree you grab fight to the death and you grab martial mastery. Once again, this deals more normal damage but less skill damage. Finally, there is a talent build that I personally have used in the past, and this basically is a hybrid approach where you do get all the march speed from both trees, but you skip out on the bonus stats up on the top here in favor of grabbing effortless and getting more counterattack damage from unyielding. A lot of players don't like effortless because it does require that you maintain staying in battle, and a lot of times this is out of your control. Sometimes you simply cannot stay in battle, you must retreat, and therefore you will lose all of your stacks here, and these stacks do increase very slowly. And so I can understand why players do not like effortless, but I wanted to show this off as a build that I personally have used in the past, and I think it is just fine. Again, in KVK2, if you're pairing with someone like YSG, I would probably do something like this. Otherwise, you're really not going to use Alex as a primary for most of your time playing Rise of Kingdoms. Now eventually you're going to get the museum in your city, and this is where you can obtain the relic for Alexander the Great, and you're not going to see this when he first shows up in the game, so don't worry about that, but eventually you will be able to get a double relic upgrade here for Alexander the Great. The double upgrade gives him 20% infantry defense and 6% normal damage taken reduction, both of which are actually very good for Alexander the Great, and here's why. Like we mentioned before, his stats on his kit are mostly attack, 70% infantry attack most of the time. Sometimes you'll get 30% defense, but most of the time you will not. So here you get, on top of that 70% attack, you get 20% defense all the time, and sometimes you'll have an extra 30%. On average, you're probably like that equals out to like maybe 25% infantry defense, which honestly is solid. It's solid. It's not the best in the game, but it's good enough. He was missing this, he has it now, we love that. And also normal damage taken reduction is deceptively good because, well, every turn you're taking normal damage that you're hitting somebody or whatever, but also any smite damage that you take is reduced by 6%, and any combo damage that you take is reduced by 6% as well. So anyone using King Arthur as primary here, you're going to be a little bit more tanky to that, which is quite nice. This is like the small amount of tankiness that Alexander the Great really needed, and so I like that a lot. And the good news is that lots of older commanders have 3 relic upgrades, so eventually we can expect that for Alex. I have no idea what that might look like and if it'll be too late by the time that comes around, but regardless, if we see something like 30% infantry defense or 10% normal damage taken reduction, even more tanky, which we love to see. Now the last thing I want to talk about is the formation for Alexander the Great, and this is really going to come down to who he is paired with. Okay, now just keep in mind that the formation only matters for the primary commander. Okay, secondary commander's formation doesn't matter at all. It even says that right here: the formations and armaments of his troops secondary commander have no effect. Okay, so don't worry about that. But Alex can go multiple ways here. First of all, if you're pairing him with YSG, then you are going to be dealing a lot of skill damage. He also again has skill damage on the second skill here, so doing the wedge formation is just fine if that's all that you have, and in the early game that probably will be all that you have. Later down the line, if you're pairing him with somebody like Liu Che, or you know, early in the game if you're pairing him with someone like Martel for example, then maybe you can go for arch formation. Really, again, I would just go with whatever you have the best stats for, unless we're talking Liu Che. If we're talking Liu Che Alex, you want the arch formation. Obviously that is the best play because the active skill on Liu Che deals way more smite damage than you're going to deal from the instant proc from Alexander the Great. Plus every turn's white numbers are just going to be a little bit better here, so we like that a lot. Okay, so now we've covered Alex's entire kit, his skills, museum relic, talents, formation, everything. Let's talk about the pros and cons of Alex. Okay, and we've kind of, I've sprinkled this in already, but I just want to make it very clear. When it comes to pros, he is easily one of the best pairs in the game for Liu Che, who is easily the strongest infantry commander in the game at the time of recording this video. He gives Liu Che a solid instant proc. He's the fastest infantry commander, and he gives him a ton of infantry attack to boost the smite damage of the active skill here. Also, the synergy with the combo damage to pop the instant proc on Alex's second skill is quite good, and because a lot of your damage comes from this instant proc and not necessarily getting your rage cycle all the way through to both first and second commander, he's actually pretty easy to use as long as you have a strong device. Ideally you're playing on PC with a mouse and keyboard and you have a good internet connection. If that's the case and you know how to do the hit and run in and out strategy, then he's easy to use. You're just going to be farming kills with this instant proc damage, which is really, really nice. And honestly, the meta right now is shifting more and more towards that instant proc damage build. Okay, so Alex has all of that going for him right now, which is really nice. The cons are that he can't really be used as a primary commander, right? At least outside of kvk 2 and maybe 3. Really shouldn't use him as primary. He's kind of doomed to be a secondary forever, at least at the time of recording this. He's a relatively old commander, so things like his shielding factor are not very good. He doesn't have things like all damage, which we see on a lot of the newer commanders. He has no AoE on his kit, which we really like and sort of expect at this point in 2025. And the biggest con of Alexander the Great, and this is the reason why I said that the cracks in his armor are starting to show, the biggest con for Alexander the Great is that he now has competition. He now has competition in the form of Philip II, which ironically I believe was his father. Yeah, his son was Alexander the Great. So his dad steps in here and actually sort of starts to push him closer to the edge of the meta than he's been in the last, I would say, 18 months. And here's why. Philip II has a much more supportive buff on the active skill than the shield from Alex, even though I would argue that the 4-second debuff on Alex is actually probably better than this 2 seconds that you're getting here. Yeah, the more that I think about it, the 4-second debuff on Alex is better than this, but at least this is better than the shielding factor, right? But the second skill is where things start to turn around for Philip, because even though he's slower than Alex, he gives you defense, which makes you even more tanky on the battlefield, especially as infantry. And being a leadership commander, Philip can be used with anybody, Cavs, infantry, or archers. So if Philip gets pushed away from infantry, you could just swap him over to Cavs or to archers, or you can use him with Trajan as a literal leadership march. The third skill though gives you 30% more all damage. And so even though you could argue and say, well, Alex gives you 70% attack most of the time, which is it's literally double the defense that you get here. Surely you'd rather have 70% attack than 35% defense. And that's true, but it's 35% defense and 30% all damage, and the 30% all damage is way better than you think it is. I would argue that this is probably equivalent to at least 75% attack, so you're still getting all the damage output that you'd be getting from Alex, but you're also getting 35% defense, the only downside being that you're losing 10% march speed, right? And he also has an instant proc here, and even though the damage factor is a little bit lower, because the fact that it's AoE, it does end up being slightly more powerful as long as you're hitting those 3 targets, and it has a rage reduction for those targets. And finally, the expertise gives you a chance of casting active skills again. So really the con for Alex is that now there's a choice that is arguably better, slightly slower and without that debuff, but everything else on the kit is better. So that really raises some if not red flags, at least some yellow flags. And so we have to raise the question, is Alexander the Great still worth getting here in 2025 now that we have a commander that is arguably better at the exact same role? And I'm here to tell you that if you're just entering kvk2, Alexander the Great is a must get commander. If you want to be strong, powerful, and deadly in kvk2, Alexander the Great is still your best choice. He's super good in kvk2. You could pair him with YSG, you can pair him with Pyrrhus, you can pair him with Martell, you can even pair him with Sun Tzu if you have nobody else, although I'd hope not. But you know, if you could put him with Ethelfled, right, as Ethelfled secondary. There's so many good pairings for him in kvk2, but especially that YSG pairing is devastating. And the best part is that with the commander swap event that comes around at the end of kvk2, once you get your value out of Alexander the Great, you can then swap him for Philip. literally, like straight up. You just get enough of those, whether you expertise Alex or not, right? Ideally you would want to have saved up enough sculptures by then, but even if you didn't, even if you got enough 5551, which is a really decent stopping point, you are missing that crazy debuff here. But 5551 at least gets you all of the march speed and all the instant proc damage. Then you just swap him over to Philip and you basically have the same thing, but he's a versatile commander for any troop type, and you could even argue that he might be slightly better than Alex anyway. And even if, let's say, you know, you're at the end of kvk2 and you only have enough swap tickets to swap one commander, and you decide that you're going to get rid of your YSG, right? Let's say that's the one commander you're going to swap, get rid of, and you're going to be stuck with your Alexander the Great. No problem, you just slap him behind Liu Che and you're going to pop off just like you always have over the past 18 months. There's no difference there. This march still performs, like I said at the beginning of the video, super well. So just to recap, the best commander pairs for Alexander the Great in season 2 of kvk are going to be Alex primary with YSG secondary, Alex primary with Pyrrhus secondary, or truthfully you could kind of go either way here. There's a good chance that if you invested in Pyrrhus for kvk1, he might be already level 60 with 6 stars, and in that case you probably don't want to waste the stars on Alexander the Great, although you're going to swap them anyway, so hopefully you'll at least get 2 commanders from that swap event that you'll like to use as primary. Or you could pair with Charles Martel. Now realistically I probably would do Alexander the Great primary here once again, just for the maximum damage output. Sometimes you would want to time Charles Martel's active skill because of the damage dealt, but in the case of Alexander the Great, his active skill doesn't deal damage anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. Now when it comes to Season of Conquest, I feel like the commander pairings here are very straightforward, the biggest one being Liu Che primary, Alex secondary. That's like cream of the crop. You really don't have to look much farther than that. However, if you are running multiple infantry armies and you have Philip behind Liu Che and you're trying to look for another instant proc fast infantry commander to put somewhere, you could try to slap Alex behind somebody like Ragnar or behind somebody like CPO Prime. Those are definitely suboptimal places to put Alex, but I do know that people have been messing around with moving Alex around in the 3 army lineup. More than likely though, even if you are using Philip in your infantry armies, then you still probably want to run the Liu Che Alex and then put the Philip somewhere else. So for example, you put the Philip behind the Ragnar, or for example, if you run Liu Che Alex and Ragnar CPO and you want to throw Guan back in there, you just do the Guan Philip. At least Philip is giving Guan Yu a bunch of the defense that he is missing, so at least there's that. But really Alex should be behind Liu Che almost without question in 2025. So then comes the most important question. Okay, we know that if you're a new player, you should get Alex in kvk2. He's going to perform well and you can swap him away to somebody else if you want to at the end. But what if you're already past kvk2 and you don't have Alexander the Great yet? Should you invest in him in 2025? And this is where I'm going to give you lots of caution, okay, for a few reasons. First of all, Philip can fill the role that Alexander the Great currently plays, and he can do it arguably just as good, if not better. He's a little bit slower, he loses the debuff, but everything else about his kit is the same or better, and you can use him with any troop type. So if you're looking for that Alex experience, I would say at this point it's better to go for Philip than it is to go for Alex. The only exceptions to that are if you're already using your Philip somewhere else, like behind your King Arthur for example, or behind a Zhuge Liang, then you want something behind your Liu Che, and if you're running more than one infantry army, that somebody is going to be Alexander the Great. So there's still plenty of use for Alexander the Great in 2025 and beyond. But the other thing that I want to caution you on is that the next release for commanders, the next commander release, is more than likely going to be infantry commanders. Okay, so right now is arguably the worst time to be investing in infantry commanders, and I'm recording this at the end of March 2025. Most likely sometime in May we're going to be seeing a new infantry release. And so would you want to be investing in a season 2 legendary infantry commander, or would you rather invest those sculptures in whatever's coming next, assuming that that commander could be power crept? If it's on the same level as Arthur, then you absolutely will want that more than Alexander the Great. So all of that to say that Alexander the Great still performs really well in 2025 behind Liu Che, no question about it, makes him super fast, performs great. But now that there's a challenger and now that we have an upcoming infantry release, really the question is it still worth it to get Alex if you don't have him already? And for that reason, I would say you probably want to hold off. Another thing that I'll point out here is that if you went all in on the William Wallace when he came out instead of Alexander the Great, then I would still probably point you in that direction. I personally find that my Alexander the Great performs better than my William Wallace, but I can see scenarios where William Wallace might outperform, right? Scenarios where you're constantly getting both commanders active skill off and you're just dominating that skill cycle. The 2400 here is going to hit harder than the 1700 on Alex. There's no question there, right? So the William Wallace Liu Che combo is fine. You probably still don't need the Alex at that point. So that's going to do it for today's video. I wanted to update you guys on my thoughts and opinions on Alexander the Great in 2025. Still performs super well, but it's in a really questionable spot if you should be getting him in Season of Conquest at this point. But the good news is that if you're still in KVK2, you can always just swap him away to something else that is arguably better. And again, I want to emphasize that my Liu Che Alex performs super well. It is still my best performing March in the current KVK that I'm in right now. I'm just trying to prepare you guys for the future, for what's to come. I don't want you to invest in Alex today and then come May you jump in my comment section and yell at me and say, Omni, why did I get Alex back in March? Why didn't you warn me? Okay, so I wanted to post this video now to just hopefully save a couple of you guys from making that potential mistake. Also could be the case that the May release for infantry is garbage, and if that's the case, well, then we've got another year of Alex. Anyway guys, with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, drop a thumbs up on it. Helps out the channel a ton, helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it. And we recently hit 85,000 subscribers, which is honestly insane. Thank you guys so much for all the support lately. Some of you guys watching though might think that you're subbed and you're actually not, so just double check down below if you're subscribed. Click that button and click the bell if you want to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. With that being said guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.